time is it there in Seattle, and how's it going?
Oh, how's it going, Mike? Pretty good. It's 14:15 or 2:15 p.m. over here.
All right, let me introduce Al. Al is literally the Jew in the smoky room. Whenever you've heard me refer to the Jew in the smoky room with the cigar sometimes, that's actually Al Johnson. He's that Jew. And, he's a two-time Army veteran of the Iraq War, EOD of all things. And so he's got a very interesting background. One of those backgrounds that's very difficult to explain. With a great deal of counterterrorism expertise. For instance, numerous governments depend on him. I'll let him explain that if he wishes to. And Al is the one that actually got me involved with the comfort women issue in 2014. He flew over to Thailand and briefed me up on this information operation that China was running that to undermine the relationship between Japan and Korea, Japan, and the United States, and other relations. So it was actually Al that got me involved in that in 2014. And so it gave several days of briefings, and then I spent a lot of time researching it and finally jumped into that information war. Anyway, so Al's paying very close attention to the virus issues and also information operation issues from China. And again, he's got a pretty serious presence in Asia when he's doing counterterrorism consulting with various governments. Al, how's it going over there in Seattle?
Well, good, good. It's a little colder there in Chiang Mai. Sometimes I wish I was back over there in Thailand, where it's a little easier to weather out the storm, so to speak. But appreciate you having me on, and hopefully we'll be able to educate some of your viewers out there.
Yeah, Al's one of those spooky smart people like Maura Moynihan. Who, by the way, Maura sent an email about a couple of hours ago. She's ready to go as a co-host, and so but she's up in New York right now, and they've got some New York problems going on right now. But so we'll get to Maura later. Maybe she's watching. If you're out there, Maura, I hope everything's going well. So Al, let's talk about Czech Republic. You were, before we went live, you were saying some very interesting things about Czech Republic.
Yeah, so one of the things is, we look at different responses. So that, as you know, sometimes organizational structure will dictate outcome. So we're always interested in what other people do to respond to crisis. And so,
hey, hold on one second. See, that's
sure.
something that you've said to me for years, and it's just a very, very smart thing. Organizational, please explain.
Structure. Oh, sure. Yeah. I can't take credit for I think my father actually inculcated it into me, but it's organizational structure dictates outcomes. And what that is you can have humans being social creatures, and the way we organize ourselves, either in bureaucracies or military units or your local PTA, how it's organized and set up is a large determinant in the outcomes that will be achieved. Because you can have somebody with a lot of energy that just keeps going, but the organization can wear them down or move them into certain directions so that eventually the organizational inertia takes over. And so how we set up our organizations is critically important because that is the predominant direction. That's the inertia that organization will take and how it impacts things, no matter how we feel about it, no matter how you put a good person at the helm. If they have 100 people under them organized in a certain way, they can only do so much. And so, I tend to look at organizations and how they respond and what type of social grouping they put around it in order to figure out, well, usually this thing will have a certain outcome to it, and why, as you well know, the CCP will react in a certain way. As you said, you can look at something and there's certain patterns that come about, certain behaviors that will always manifest themselves in certain situations. And so the CCP, being organized as it is, has patterns to it that you can predict things, and it's usually just figuring out, okay, how they're going to respond to this based on what they responded in the past, and have they changed their organization, yes or no, judging off
Right.
that.
See, I mean, that's a very wise thing that your father taught you. He's an Army veteran as well, right?
Yep, 32 years actually.
More than just your basic Army veteran, 32 years. And I think your family is like mine. They're kind of Forrest Gumpish on with a lot of family members.
Nothing's originally done. It's like, what are we going to do this week? Well, we'll go in the Army. Okay.
Yeah, we'll just join the Army for 32 years. Hey, look, Soy's on. Hey, Soy. Good morning, Soy. And so listen, that's one of the smartest things I mean, it's very important. The organizational structure dictates outcome. I mean, it's one simple sentence that says books full. And that's why we see a lot of issues that we're having now with for instance, this mask conundrum where Americans can't seem to quite figure out, or the CDC and our witch doctor, Jerome Adams, can't figure out, he's the Surgeon General, can't seem to figure out whether or not they should tell Americans to wear masks or not. Meanwhile, you were telling me about the Czech Republic before we went live. So tell me more about what you were saying about the Czech Republic.
Well, the Czech Republic is one of the first to respond to the crisis in Europe. In fact, they were the first. They actually have a mask law. They said you cannot be out on the street without masks. And that, plus a lot of other things I'll go over here, means that in a country of 10.7 million, they only had, up to yesterday, only 8 deaths. And they're right. They had a lot of Italians. There's a lot of Italians moving up and down there, a lot of travel, a lot of trade between Germany and Italy. So there was the contact points where you could spread the virus. And yet through their efforts early and aggressively, they managed to keep the infection rate down. And then from that, they were able to keep the death rate very low. If comparison. So to give you a comparison,
Jacob's on from Czech Republic right now. Hey, Jacob, I've been to Czech Republic many times. I don't know, 15, 20 times probably. And it's one of my favorite people. Tough, Chinese Communist Party hates the Czech Republic because the Czech Republic stands up to them. And it really irks. Is irks a common term, or is that just a Southern term? It really irks the Chinese Communist Party when Czech Republic is just like, whatever. And, by the way, some of the fighters in Burma, in Myanmar, love the Czechs. They love the Czechs because Czechs have supported freedom in Burma for years. Anyway, off on a side topic. I want to hear what you have to say, Al.
Oh, no worries. To give an example, Korea has 51 million people. So, 5 times as many as Czech Republic. They have 169 deaths. So we're looking Czech Republic, even among those that are listed as, good responses, you still have a very low rate. And what they did was as early as 28 January. Now, keep in mind the timeline of this virus. As much as, the CCP wants to change history, as they often are, like to do globally, they want to change history. We see that very early on, right after the Chinese New Year. So the Chinese New Year, you get the responses. And this is, I think, what triggered you and kind of what triggered me was, looking at how they suddenly responded to this and going, whoa, there's a lot more here than meets the eye. And the Czechs were among those that were very early on saying, wait, there's something anomalous in here. The Chi-Coms don't react to something that's nothing like this. And what happened was 28th of January, they were already testing people. So there was 20 suspected cases.
Okay, rewind the tapes here. Rewind the tapes. So on 28 January, halt. You're saying the Czech Republic was already testing people on 28 January.
Correct. They had 20 suspected cases. They tested them, and they all tested negative. But that's the level of focus that they had. That they weren't
awesome, man. Czech Republic is awesome. First time you go there, you're like, these people are special. But the first times I was going to it was Czechoslovakia when I was first going there because it was still communist. And you could just tell there's just special people were crushed down by communism. But as soon as that wall was down, Czech Republic just blossomed. Well, then Czechoslovakia split, of course. But it was velvet. There was no violence or anything. They just said, okay, you be Slovakia and we'll be Czech Republic, and everything's fine. So, and look at the way that they've handled this. Kudos to Czech Republic.
Yep. So two days after that, so we're talking, Chinese New Year had just happened. They saw the anomaly within China, like most of us did, or the people who were paying attention. And then 28 January, they did their testing on 20 cases. On the 30th of January, they stopped visas going in and out of the CCP. So they said, nope, you're not going in and out of China.
Okay, hold on. On 28 January, you're saying they stopped travel to China?
On 30 January, so 2 days later. So they did.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
okay.
They had 20 suspected cases. So they're paying attention. They said, hey, there's 20 suspect cases here. They did tests. The test came back negative. But even though the test came back negative, on the 30th of January, they read the signs. They said, okay, we're going to stop any visas. So any applications for visas for travel, to and from the CCP, no. So they stopped it. And then about a week later, on the 8th of February, that's when they completely suspended travel to and from China. So they said they were just cutting it down. So on the 8th of February, they've already done their travel ban that early, which is good. And then about 20 days after that, so we're looking at 28th of February. That's when the local medical officials were already imposing targeted quarantines. So in other words, if it looks like you have suspicious symptoms, they're going to go ahead and do a local quarantine. But the local medical folks look like they're empowered enough to be able to do that at the local level to respond to it. 1st March was when they had their first 3 confirmed cases, and they came over from Italy. So, and one of them was actually an American tourist. So there was an Italian over there, and then an American tourist that had just come from Lombardy area in Italy. So they had their first 3 cases. 2nd of March was 1 more case. And the 3rd of March, they had the 4th case. So there's 4 cases in total. And that's when the National Security Council there actually
we're talking about the Czech Republic, by the way, who's
Yep.
like South Korea is very far ahead of this because they're using their brains and they're not politically correct. That's one of the things I love about Czechs. They're just smart. They're not politically correct at all.
And this is a huge difference. So we look at, who are your outliers that are doing good responses, and yes, they have, generally they have their smaller land areas and things like that. But one thing that we do see that Czech differentiates itself very similar to Taiwan. So South Korea got very aggressive with it, but that was almost a private response. South Korea had actually off-putted itself because they didn't do travel bans in the beginning, and Moon kind of set his country up for failure. But luckily, the South Korean people pulled together, and through some technology and through innovation and through some great aggressive moves there and social networking online, were able to put a hold on it. But it could have been a tragedy. I mean, it's not from soup to nuts, where the Czech Republic from day one, throughout the whole of nation approach was already hitting it. So South Korea saved it. They had a bad kickoff, but they were able to spike the football in the touchdown toward the end there. But the Czech Republic from the kickoff was doing great. So kudos to both nations. But if you're looking at something for parallels for Czech Republic, I'd say Taiwan, because they both recognized what was happening in Beijing, and Taiwan said, nope, close it down. This is going to be a pandemic. It's very big potential for pandemic. It's worse than what's officially coming out, because look at how they're reacting. And we're gonna protect our people. That's what Czech and Taiwan did. South Korea with Moon said, and this is a direct translation of his quote, that we suffer with the Chinese people because that's what friends do. And he refused. I think it was 780. I have to go back to my notes, but about 780,000 workers in South Korea, truckers mostly, said, no, you need to cut down, or you need to limit some of this contact between China and South Korea, because we don't want to catch this plague. Because South Korea had been through the SARS epidemic earlier. They still have very recent memories of another respiratory illness that came through there. So they were off-footed by their government, but they recovered very well. Taiwan and Czech with whole of nation approach. So your local medical folks, most importantly, your citizens, going along with the recommendations, good recommendations that came down, and the government all working together, and they nipped this thing in the bud, just like Taiwan. So they cut off from Italy and South Korea flights on 3rd of March, and they banned sports spectators at that point. So the large sports events were, no spectators in there. And then this was important. This will come up here in a minute. They banned the export of respirators and gear, right? And that was based on their G2, that the CCP embassy in the Czech Republic was starting to go out and mass buy all of their equipment, masks, everything that was in the Czech Republic. They got their intelligence that their embassy was, that the Beijing embassy there, the CCP embassy in the Czech Republic, had told their folks, all their little network, go out and grab everything that you can, masks, gloves, you name it. And the Czech put a kibosh on it and said, well, it's not leaving Czechoslovakia, and that was good. Now, Australia, as has been off.
Have you seen some of the reports coming out in the last 24 hours? Are you there, Al?
Yep, I'm still here.
Earth calling out. All right. Some of the reports just coming out, CIA is now saying that, that China has covered this up, or what their exact words were escaped me at this point. But I was reading some of the reports earlier. And it's like, hello, we don't need the CIA to tell us that. And Jerome Adams, our witch doctor surgeon general, has now put it off on the CDC to recommend to talk about the whether or not people should wear masks. This is the sort of government that we have. So recursing back to what you said before, Organizational structure dictates outcome. The organizational structure of the United States, something is fundamentally flawed with it that has led to this just getting so out of control. When we see other countries like Taiwan, South Korea, Czech Republic, like jumping right on it, and Singapore jumping 2 feet right on it, and taking it by the, but not the United States, where this thing is totally sees the initiative. How does it look in Seattle right now, by the way?
Seattle, actually, we were lucky in a way. So kind of similar to South Korea, we had I believe it was one of the earliest deaths was here, the nursing home. So, we had 2 nursing homes that were hit, and a wave of the first group big cluster of deaths happened here in the nursing home. And because of that, the state responded a little earlier than most other states. So we had initially kind of a stay at home, limit things. They told restaurants, go ahead and start shutting down bars. And it was a recommendation at first, but a lot of people, ended up doing it. So the culture of Washington State was pretty good. Everybody kind of stayed home a little bit. And then gradually the restrictions kept increasing a little bit by little bit. But I think the shelter in place order, people did it a lot, and it helped to flatten our curve. We have not had a spike. We're not like New York. We're not like, I think Georgia, now Florida is having some problems, Louisiana, even though we had it earlier. And it's because we did the shelter in place, the no contact, the social distancing. We put those implementations in early. And then there's some initiatives here that are kind of interesting. One is SCAN, which is the Seattle Coronavirus Assessment Network. And that came from the Seattle flu study. So I think that one started back in 2017, if I remember correctly. And it was a grouping. It was a UW, University of Washington Medicine, Fred Hutchison, the Seattle Children's Group. And then they got some funding from the Brotman Institute. And then Microsoft came in with theirs, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, along with Amazon Care. So it's a public-private partnership, everybody working together. And they went with King County, which is a Seattle county. And they said, hey, let's come up with and expand the Seattle flu study that we've been doing for a couple of years and do some really good data analytics and figure out how this thing spreads with these home kits. So Amazon's handling logistics, Amazon Care. They're sending out these little home kits throughout Seattle and King County. I think Snohomish County, too, a little bit. And you do the nasal swab, and then you send it in. And then based on, where you are, they're beginning to map out where it is. Because as you know, this virus is mostly asymptomatic. Most people don't know that they have it. I believe I saw 80% of the cases that were positive, ended up being cases positive in China, were from asymptomatic folks. And that's with China's skewed numbers. I mean, we'll never be able to trust anything.
Or minor symptoms, or minor symptoms.
Right. Exactly.
Actually, speaking of that, I'm going to see if Maddie has sent a message about how she feels today, but she's been feeling much better.
But hope she gets better, yeah.
Actually, can you go over those dates again about Czech Republic? For instance, what they did on the 27th and the 29th and so on.
Yep. Yeah. So just quick review, and then we'll move forward on that one. It's 28 January they were already testing. So they had 20 suspect cases test negative. The 30th of January, 2 days later, they said visas, no more visas. On the 8th of February, they said no more travel to China. On the 28th of February, the local medical folks were doing targeted quarantines based on the intelligence they were receiving or the surveys in their areas. 1st March, then you have your first 3 cases. So they were proactive before they even had the cases hit. Then they had positive cases on March. Those are from Italy. One was an American tourist. 2nd March, there's 1 case. 3rd March, there's 1 case. And that's when they said, okay, no flights from Italy, South Korea, ban sports spectators. And then the most importantly, it's what's going to come up here. Based on their G2 that the Chinese embassy was saying, hey, grab up all the gear. They said nobody's going to be able to export respirators and gear. The next day, 4th March, they had 3 cases. 5th of March, I think it was 12 total. So they had a little increase there. And then on the 16th of May, the 6th of May, they said, okay, everybody coming in from Italy, if you've been to Italy or you're from Italy, you're going to have a 14-day quarantine, just right there. By the 7th of March, they only had 26 confirmed cases total, right? So if you look at their curve versus some of the other curves, you see it's fairly slow, and they're testing. It's not like they're not testing and skewing the numbers that way.
Right. They're just pragmatic people. The Czechs are pragmatic people.
And they weren't afraid to do in other words, if this is what needs to take to do it, we're going to do it. And again, it's the kind of the whole community, whole society approach, because the society said, okay, And they did it, and they had pretty, at least from what I've seen, and your readers and your viewers in the Czech Republic might have a better visibility of it because they're looking at their native language. But as far as I could see, at least into the translated stuff, it was fairly unified in what they were doing. There wasn't a lot of mixed messages, not like we're getting here sometimes. But on the 12th of March, they went ahead and did the 30-day state of emergency, and then they implemented that. And this is pretty interesting. On the 16th of March, that's when they did their final national quarantine. But the police raided a warehouse that's connected to the CCP in the Czech Republic, and they found a huge amount of hoarded medical gear, like masks and everything like that. And that's really a scandal. I'm really surprised it didn't kind of hit more on the news, because it was really phenomenal what they read. So,
Al, do you think, is it possible that this was a bioterrorism event? I mean, for instance, hoarding up. There's so many things. Remember that video, for instance, in Italy where the Chinese guy's like, hug me, I'm not a virus, and everybody's hugging him. And you and I both study the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and their information wars, and how harsh and how hard they play. And it certainly, I'm not going to go down the conspiracy path. Everybody's bringing it up every day. Was this really a bioweapon or whatever? I don't know, and I'm not saying one way or the other. I will say there's a lot of suspicious stuff around this. That's very clear. We can all see that. It really makes me wonder. I mean, the more of the pattern that I see, the more suspicious that I become that this was not entirely accidental. I'm not saying that this was intentional. I don't know. It just looks weird.
Well, I think it's accurate. It's a supported statement to say that China has taken advantage of the crisis. Whether they started the forest fire or not is irrelevant. That they're taking advantage of it at the world's detriment. That's undeniable. I think that's something that can be said. That maybe they were off-footed. They looked like they were taken aback. Initially denying that this virus outbreak was occurring in Wuhan. They definitely did that. They did measures that literally exacerbated the spread of this thing. They had the Chinese New Year going on. They had a community, meet where everybody comes out. It was like 60,000. It was within the tens of thousands of people having a community meal in an enclosed environment, during the winter. I mean, it's perfect for, incubating and spreading this thing on a massive scale, and, arresting and disappearing, quote unquote, doctors that spoke out about it, that said, hey, you need to wash your hands, you need to take these precautions against it, and you arrest them and you put them away for spreading, quote unquote, rumors. So they definitely did everything that they could in the beginning to exacerbate it. Now, whether that was intentionally to germinate it, I doubt it. I think they're not that competent. But I think once they realized what they had, they're definitely going to take advantage of it. In other words,
that's another thing, because we've seen that as well on their information war. For instance, on the comfort women issue, I think in the beginning, and you're an expert on this topic, and I am as well. We've studied this together for 5-6 years now, right? Expert's a big term, but let's say we're highly knowledgeable on it. And you find these so-called experts that are university professors, and Al and I can talk with them for like 5 minutes and say this guy or this woman doesn't know anything, about the comfort women information war. But what happened with that, we can see, is that they came onto something that was already there in the 80s. Really, it started in the 70s, by Yoshida Seiji. But anyway, and then we get into the 80s, and then Tiananmen Square happened, June 4th and all that. And then, they do the normal deflection. Hey, what about Nanjing? These sorts of things. We're talking about China deflecting attention from their own massacres, Tiananmen Square chain of events. And then the helping to grow this comfort women thing, and then realizing that they're onto something and then weaponizing it. So I don't think that we know they didn't start it. It was started by a Japanese communist, Yoshida Seiji, or Seiji Yoshida, depending on how you want to say it, right? And then from there, eventually it was weaponized. And that may have been something that happened with this virus. For instance, maybe it wasn't intentionally created to be weaponized. I have no idea. but now it's been weaponized. It's been weaponized insofar as doing things to basically destroy the United States. And that's something that you and I have been warning about for years. Not about the virus in particular, but the CCP is not, their goal is not, where's Archie Miyamoto right now? He should be on. He's our mutual friend and author and veteran of Korea and Vietnam Wars, by the way. You know, Archie's been saying for years that the ultimate target is the United States, not Japan. And we can see that. Anyway, I want to hear you talk, Al. You have many important things to say.
Oh, no, I defer to you. But the important thing was on March 16th, and you're absolutely right. So what happened was China takes advantage of this, and they only are able to take advantage of it really in darkness. So when you don't pay attention to what's going on and there's not a light shined upon their actions, they continue to do it, and they it proliferates these bad actions. And the world is starting to wake up. I mean, I hate to use the term, but it's almost a great awakening now. You know, after 5, 6, 7 years of, getting, this information goes to deaf ears about what's going on. People now wake up and go, oh, they can see the patterns. They see the bad actor that, has been right next to them the whole time. And as an example, that on March 16th in the Czech town of Lovosice, when the police raided it. So on March 16th, they raided this area, and it was the medical supplies were owned by a front company for the CCP, and there was a guy named Zhao Lingjian, and he was a huge influence operations in the Czech Republic, massive. So pretty much, guys that do over here. And in his warehouse, he had 680,000, this is according to the Czechs, 680,000 masks, 28,000 ventilators, and even some of them, I think they said 100,000, let me check my notes, 100,000 of these were labeled Chinese Red Cross aid to Italy, and he's sitting on them. And so remember, they stopped the export of it, and early on, back in the 3rd of March, but they got intelligence that was happening, and so they stopped the export of it. So he had to sit on it. So it was sitting in there, and he had tried to piecemeal it out through second party, third party sellers to try to move his product. And luckily they went in, they raided it, they confiscated it all, they gave some of it to Italy, and then they used the rest for their own. But lucky for them. But contrast that, say, with Australia, who didn't put controls on that, where they let it out, or Canada, for example, with Trudeau, who says, well, I'm going to give all my stuff over to China. Well, great intention. However, to me, a leader is responsible to his own unit first, right? And the father is responsible to his family. Leader is responsible to his unit. A president or premier or prime minister is responsible to his nation welfare and well-being, and then others. So, at that point, it was recognizable that this was a pandemic. At this point, it was very recognizable that if you were paying attention, that this had a much greater infection rate that was actually being put out, and that they should have understood what was in their area. And what they're responsible for their personnel first. And if you're good, you give it to somebody else, like on an airline, right? When the oxygen mask drop down, put it on yourself first, and then you can take care of others, right? You do no good to anybody by trying to save somebody else, but you're only going to put yourself in jeopardy. And so that's what you have to pay attention to here. In the Czech Republic, good for them, stopped the export. March 16th, raided this guy, Zhao Lingjian, who is a member of, like I said, their influence operations. And he actually runs I think it's the Qingtian hometown operation, which is an organization. It's a front organization for the CCP. And they also it's an offshoot of the United Front Work Department, which is their big PR spin. So the United Front Work Department does a lot of stuff that does overseas influence operations. So they caught him red-handed with all that stuff in a warehouse. And, unfortunately, it's a little too late for, folks like Australia and others. But, being aware that was going on, and then they try to give that back to the nations, because that was their goal, was, they're going to buy up everything off the shelves. And then when everybody runs out of masks, then they come in with those masks, say it's a gift for their PR, but yet sell it back to you. Because remember, Italy and Spain and these other countries had to pay for that quote unquote free gift. The only Chinese that I know that actually gave something free was Taiwan, who gave, when I go back and look at the numbers, but around 100 million masks they've actually given out, or 100,000 masks or 1 million masks. I have to go back and get my numbers. But Taiwan actually gave out free masks. The Chinese free mask came with a bill attached, which in most cultures is not free. So
right.
The other interesting part is I've got to trace this down. But actually, their network, they may be able to get this one quicker. The Chinese embassy in some of their aid packages shows, gift from China, and so they'll have the aid package on there. It'll be labeled with the Chinese masks, but on the labels, all of them coming from the Chinese Air, so China Air. So it's an official Chinese plane. Pallet loads are coming off, but on the photographs, for whatever reason, there's the Chinese Communist flag, and then right next to that, I don't know why, I don't know if it's been authorized or if they're just putting it there. It says Korean Red Cross, and then there's a Korean flag in there, the South Korean flag. So, are they, were they working together to give this information out? Was it South Korea helping China to be able to give these or sell these masks to other countries? I don't know, but it's one interesting part. Or did the Chinese take the South Korean Red Cross donations and then re-gift it? It may mean nothing, but it was just kind of interesting that that's what they were putting on all of their web pages in English on their Twitter feed, that was part of their gifts. And it was the Chinese flag and then the South Korean flag. And again, it may be just to divide things, because that South Korea is politically very divided right now, between the pro Beijing Moon factions and the pro liberty, pro South Korean, pro American, other coalitions. Wouldn't call it a faction because it's not quite united. But that was interesting. So that was the raids that occurred in Czech, and then we move forward a little bit, going down to let's see, it was 16th of March they did the raids. The 17th of March and 18th of March they began the masks. So 18th of March you could not go outside without a mask.
That's Czech Republic.
Czech Republic, yep. Do not go outside without a mask. Now keep in mind, from that date to this date, if that date, as you remember, because I remember you posted it and you were absolutely livid with advice that says don't wear a mask. This isn't airborne. Don't worry about it. It's not going to do any good. And it's like, well, if there's a chance to do good, you're going to take the chance. Seatbelts don't save you from every single accident, but you still wear a seatbelt. We still mandatory, most countries, that you have to wear a seatbelt when you drive a car, because it will reduce the chance of having a fatal car crash. It won't reduce it. It won't eliminate it, but it will reduce it. Same with masks. And the Czech Republic, good for them, basically said you don't go outside on the 18th of March without a mask. And here it is the 2nd of April, and we can't even get the same message over here about do you wear it or do you not. So good for them. They put a message, they put it out there, and they had the masks because they didn't allow anybody to suddenly take those masks and send it to some other country. So that was good for them that they held on to their own to help their people out first.
I believe it was probably early February that I was talking about ways to maybe cleanse your mask by putting them in sunlight or whatever. I think that was early February. And now we've got people just now talking about, how do we clean the mask? It's unbelievable. But as you know, Al, I had enough masks to begin with, and I bought 600 in January to hand out to people. I bought 600 of these in January just to give away. But I already had enough masks. I don't, and you exactly. Too. I mean, and you're a prepared individual. I mean, you're a 2-time war veteran yourself, and one of the most brilliant people I know. This Al Johnson literally is the Jew in the smoky room that I've talked about before, with the cigar and all that. When I'm like, hey, I got to go call up my friend, the Jew in the smoky room, that's Al. I guess that's not politically correct in Al to call you that in America, is it, Al? But me and Al don't care because we spend most of our time together in Asia.
Yep. But in the irony is on the 21st of March. That's when the CCP sent back gift masks, but send a bill with them. And they turned out to be the mask that they had actually kind of moved out before the ban took effect on the 3rd of March. So some of the stuff they started hoarding and sending back to China, they re-gifted, but with the price tag attached. And it wasn't until 22nd of March that we have the first death now in the Czech Republic. And that's kind of where we brought up to date. And to date, as of yesterday, they've only had 8 deaths. And that's in a country of 10.7 million people.
Czechs are awesome. Czechs are awesome. Like I said, I might have been there, 15 or 20 times, quite a lot. And in the old special forces, by the way, the Green Berets were formed in the 1950s, or, got the Green Beret actually from Kennedy and all that. But anyway, in that first generation, a lot of the Green Berets were people from like Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Poland and that sort of thing. And they were a different breed. So there was still some of those when I came in. And like, so I remember some of the older Czechs, they were really tough, highly competent people, and made great soldiers. And they hated communists, man. They hate them.
Well, it'd be interesting to look at, again, looking at the Eastern Bloc, right? What we used to call the Eastern Bloc, but it's now Eastern Europe. But those countries that were under, the occupation of communism, and they lived through that terror, they lived through that tyranny, and those are some of the most dynamic countries that you have. You have Estonia, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, the Czech Republic. These countries that recognize the evil for what it was because they had to live under it. And they have a different policy, than kind of the Western Europe, which wasn't under the oppression of communism. And so, we can look at the differentiation between how the Czechs responded to this. They recognized it early, and they moved, versus, some other nations which said, we don't want to do any type of these bans or quarantines or anything like that because, it's slightly uncomfortable in my mental state. And I think, this might change some perceptions and of people to realize that, at some point, your personal discomfort, is it worth a life? And sometimes the stakes are that high. And I think most people never been faced with that decision. Most people in the military, now kind of have. If you've got a couple deployments under your belt, or, some guys have like 5 or 6 deployments, they live over there. But that it does, I hate to use the word mature, but it does definitely mature your thought process to a certain degree because you prioritize things, I believe, a little more correctly. Will this save a life? Is this life or limb? Next, is there property damage? Is this going to economically disadvantage this person? Is this person going to be crippled for life? That kind of thing. And you put it into priority order. And somewhere near the bottom is, okay, you're going to be uncomfortably mentally for a little while if you dwell upon this thing. And so, kind of in modern society, we've reversed that. And we go for comfort first, and we don't really look for, what actually would impact us, physically, life, limb, economically, medically, that sort of thing. So it's kind of interesting to see how people are changing now, now that they're faced with this life or death. And this is the first time I think the globe has actually been faced with this, since the pandemic. I know we talked earlier about, when was the last time that the entire Earth went through this paradigmatic shift? And not at least since the Spanish flu, and it's arguable if that was even this much of an impact, because as you say, there's a lot more energy in systems now. And so there's a lot more dynamism, there's a lot more movement, there's a lot more communication, there's a lot more impact. And at the same time, the danger, I think, is higher because our systems are much more complicated than they were for a lot more people. So in 1917, you had a lot more rural population that, if things got really bad, well, they can go farm in their backyard, or they lived in a large plot of land. They could go hunt, fish, they could survive themselves. They could do a lot more with a smaller community. Get clothes made, repair your shoes, that sort of thing. Now, to sustain a life, to sustain a person, you are 5, 6, 7 times removed from all of the mechanisms or the building blocks that are necessary to sustain your life, and B, your life at a level where you're not going to be so stressed that you're going to get sick or be impacted in some way. And so those two factors we have right now, the complexity of society, that means we are super dependent upon many factors that we're not in control of. We can't be self-sufficient even in a small community anymore. And that the energy in these systems is so dynamic that it moves, means the modeling for any type of impact, comparing it to Spanish influenza back in 1917, 1920s, is not quite comparable. It's a lot more potential for damage now than it was, back then, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we were talking about that before we went live. There's so much more capacity for, the energy within our world now. And when I say energy, I don't mean that in a metaphysical sense. I mean it in the sense of so much more capability, whether it's aircraft, weapons,